Exclusive tutorials, study sheets and storyboards are available on my Patreon. I'm Kai, a natural manga artist from the UK. Today I want to show you how I study human anatomy. I have made a video on anatomy previously, but it didn't cover a lot of the studying stuff and was more just a general how-to. So this time I'll be actually covering how to study it properly, and on top of that I'll also be telling you what you need to know and what you don't really need to know. Of course this will just be how I approach it, so there's going to be a lot of things that other artists don't agree with or they don't do, but this is how I personally do it and this is what's worked for me. Throughout this video I'll be using a lot of reference from Joe Madureira, more specifically his Spider-Man comics and his Inhuman comics. Even though I draw manga, there's a lot to learn from comics in terms of how they draw muscles and poses. How I usually approach anatomy is splitting the body parts into separate parts so that I can approach it a lot easier and so that it's not too overwhelming. Because I think as a beginner the hardest part, or one of the hardest things that you'll face from the start, is how to learn anatomy, how to draw, muscles or body parts. And naturally I wanted to make it super easy for myself, so I came up with a simple way to do it. So for example, here you'll see that I'm drawing an arm and I'm drawing it as accurately as I can to real anatomy, or the anatomy that I was using from the book. After that I'll break it down to super basic shapes so that I can learn to draw at a lot of different angles, and I'll sort of try and turn those cylinders in a lot of different angles and perspectives and things like that. After that I'll add on the muscles, so tricep, bicep, whatever. And then after that I'll draw it all together and try and draw a lot of those to get that repetition in. Naturally all of these examples will be shown in the video, so you'll be able to sort of follow along if you're trying to learn anatomy yourself. And you won't be 100% accurate drawing this arm the first time, but you just want to sort of try and get in the patterns that are in an arm or in a certain body part, so that when you're drawing the full thing you can kind of refer back to that, and you can use those patterns as an anchor point to draw the subject in a lot of different perspectives. A good way to look for patterns would be to ask yourself, for example, how big the deltoid is or how big the bicep is. Small things like this can be super helpful. I think figuring out the patterns in whatever body part you're drawing, the process could be as long or as short as you want it to be. It's mostly about when you feel confident enough to sort of jump into breaking it down to basic shapes and things like that. The basic shape stage will be one of the easiest stages going forward, because we'll be able to use cubes or cylinders to form the body parts. I guess the harder part would be sort of figuring out how to draw in a lot of different perspectives. During this stage you're still using a lot of reference. Throughout this whole video you should be using a lot of reference to draw whatever you're going to be drawing, and that's definitely what I'm doing here. When you're drawing the basic shapes, I think this stage can take maybe a few days or a week, depending on how much time you're putting into actually studying it. If you're putting an hour in a day, maybe it'll take a week to sort of get the hang of and be able to draw in any different angle. At this stage here where you're sort of drawing the individual muscle groups, this could take a week or two to get the hang of, because you have to be able to follow the perspective and you have to be able to draw certain things in a lot of different angles. You also want to study the different muscle points at different times. So one day you might study the deltoid, the next you might study the bicep. And doing this will make it a lot more bite-sized and easier for sort of your brain to comprehend, because at first it's going to be super overwhelming, especially depending on the body part that you're actually drawing. And this stage here that I'm doing is sort of the repetition stage, so you'll see me draw a lot of different arms and a lot of different poses and perspectives with the anatomy on top. With these I like to do them as quickly as I possibly can, so like 20 or 30 seconds on each one, because you don't want to spend too much time on one arm and you want to be able to draw a lot of different ones as quickly as you can. Because naturally the more you draw something the better you're going to get at it, but if you spend all day on one arm, then it's going to take a while before you actually get good at drawing them. That's why the pattern stage is so important, so that you can sort of compare it and contrast it back to that. And of course you can always go back in stages and go back and look at the arm and be like, oh, let me look for more patterns, let me see if there's other ways that I can make drawing the arm in a lot of different poses easier for myself. And it's super helpful to do that actually. This repetition stage should take a couple weeks too, because this is gonna be the most important part of the process, and it's going to be the most sort of time consuming. The more time you put into this, the better you're going to be at drawing arms, and it's going to make it 10 times easier to draw them when you actually have finished things that you have to do. It's super important to learn to draw these in a lot of different angles and perspectives, because this is how you learn the muscle better. And if you draw these quickly and time yourself for 20-30 seconds, you could probably end up drawing like 50 a day, and you could see how much you really improve from doing that. You also want to be super mindful when you're practicing, so comparing it to the reference that you just drew, and notice mistakes that you're making and sort of try to improve those and compare it to the reference, see where you're making mistakes, and sort of correct those as you go forward and drawing more and more arms. Surprisingly, a lot of thought goes into this stage, so I would look at a lot of, tutorials and things like that too. David Finch has good tutorials on this, and you can sort of use their methods to also draw the arm and figure out how you actually enjoy drawing it. More than anything, you want a clear goal when you're studying, so focusing on one specific body part and really hammering home, what you want to improve in it is super important. You really don't want to be studying blindly, because then there are some places that you can probably grow in, but I feel like it's definitely better if you have a goal in mind and you can sort of focus on that and forget everything else. And this is a process that essentially you'll repeat for every single body part that you draw, including things like the head or torso, legs, things like that. Even while you draw the individual body parts, typically at a point you do want to start connecting it to the other body parts, because otherwise it's going to be very difficult later on when you're actually drawing a full illustration or manga page. It's going to be incredibly difficult to connect the arm to the torso or leg to the pelvis and things like that. So after a while you do want to start actually connecting those to the actual body. And that's sort of when you branch out and figure out the anatomy of a different part of the body, because a lot of the different muscles are actually connected to each other. So if you're drawing the arm, the deltoid connects to the pectoral, so you're going to need to be able to draw the pectoral to connect it to the body, unless of course you're just drawing basic shapes for now. But generally that's how you'd move across with drawing more and more different body parts. If you can too, getting some criticism from other artists is super helpful, so you can go and get some feedback from other people and see what they think of your body parts that you've drawn. And here I'll be doing some simple pose practice, so you'll see me drawing some different parts of the body or some poses that I took from Danger Girls by J. Scott Campbell. Essentially I don't really draw poses from real life because I find it super difficult to stylize it, because a lot of things that you draw in real life, afterwards if you're drawing an anime or manga style, you actually have to stylize it while you use the reference, which makes it more difficult to sort of make into something that's your own. So what I personally do is, if I'm since I want to be a manga artist or comic artist, I study comics or manga, because that's going to be where a lot of my inspiration actually comes from, and that's going to be where I actually grow in, because it's incredibly difficult to outright use a real reference and convert that to your own style, and it's not really helpful for if you're learning too. But if you want to draw a more realistic style, maybe something like Becker or something like that, I could see how drawing real people would be super helpful. But for me personally, I draw, when I'm studying specifically, I use reference from things that are already made, things that my favorite artists have drawn, and then when I'm actually drawing maybe an illustration or manga page, I don't really mind using real life references for that. Of course, if the artist you like makes a lot of mistakes when it comes to anatomy, you'll probably be making those mistakes too. But I feel like if the art style is appealing enough for you to like it, other people will also like what you put out when you draw stuff too. I think this will be a part that a lot of artists agree with, just because a lot of artists put emphasis on learning gesture and things like that, and if that works for different artists, that's totally fine. Like, I have nothing against it. But for me, Danger Girls was super helpful for drawing poses because they're so dynamic. That's pretty much all I wanted to talk about when it came to anatomy though. Somebody was asking me how to draw clothes, and it's a question I get a lot, so I wanted to cover it here too. I'm thinking of doing a little quick tips section at the end of every video, so going over basic things that isn't the concept of the video that I'm making, but something that I think people would learn a lot from. And when you're drawing folds on clothes, you want to sort of follow the form of whatever body part you're drawing. So here you can see I'm following the form of the arm super well, and wrapping around the form. Even with the wrinkles, they're going around the form of the cylinder. So if it is helpful to you, it could be good to draw contours around the whole cylinder, and then you'll know how to draw the folds when you draw them. This includes when the cylinder or arm or body part is in perspective. You also want to follow the form of the arm and what perspective that's going into. With clothes too, there's a tension point, so there's something that all the creases sort of stem from, so you want to look out for that and make sure that all your creases are sort of pointing towards that line. There's a lot of good videos on tension points and things like that, so I don't want to cover it too much. And actually I use a lot of different references for different types of clothes, so sometimes I use baggy references, and sometimes I use tighter references. It really just depends on what kind of clothes I'm drawing. And since this video is basically done, I just want to cover a little bit here at the end. So you can use, digital or traditional to do your studies. I typically do traditional studies just because I find it a little less forgiving. If you draw digitally, I'm sure that you'll be erasing things and trying to correct things and make it perfect. And the point of these studies isn't for it to be perfect, it's to sort of learn how to approach drawing these things and, learn how they actually look and, get better at actually drawing them. Then after that, you can put them all together and you can create something that's actually, resembles a human body, because this is the hardest part here. At first it's going to look pretty bad, especially if you're a beginner, but it's about, repetition and getting better at actually drawing these individual body parts and being able to put them together later on, which, is a video in and of itself. But that's it from me. Peace out, like and subscribe if you liked the video.